Well, good morning, and thank you very much for joining us. I'm Yori Folare. Well, Nigeria is in it again. I'm talking here about a grid collapse. Season of darkness for a while, at least. That was the unfortunate news yesterday. And it's really crushing because the point has been made that so very much has been invested in our power sector, energy sector, and there hasn't been really almost like anything, maybe I should say more politically correctly, there hasn't been much to show for it. But here we are. Just as the president is over, as you know, at the United Nations wooing investors, these are some of the things that investors have cited in the past as the reason for their lethargy. But the president has been saying that, look, new broom, new times, it's not business as usual. And then unfortunately, here we are. Even as the minister, the Minister of Power, the Minister of Power, Mr. Bayo Adelabu, was speaking at a conference saying that it wasn't really a big deal to sort of diagnose and understand what the problems were. Very, very shortly after that, there was an announcement of a system collapse. Okay, at this stage, we're very lucky to have with us a professor of energy and electricity law in Nigeria, in the person of Professor Yemioke. He is of the University of Lagos Law Department, as I said. A fine morning to you, Prof.
Good morning.
Most Nigerians, I would imagine, are frustrated. And now I'm talking here about the end users, the ordinary, the small ones, but then the small businesses and the individuals who have, even before the collapse, many communities have been in darkness for months for whatever the failure was. And now we have this, shall we say, equalization, where everybody now is going to be treated the same, unfortunately. It's embarrassing, isn't it, that this is what, the second or third in about a week? And Prof, something seems to be fundamentally wrong, is my layman's guess. But that's why we have you. You have all the answers. You teach this subject matter. What is wrong, Prof?
Thank you very much. Well, it's true. I'm not only teaching. I teach, I research, I practice, and I profess energy and electricity law. As rightly said, all is not well. And I'll be honest with Nigerians in saying all is not well. And I try to be there. I'll try to tone down my technical jargons to speak to Nigerians.
That would be appreciated.
So that we will understand basics, the elementary facts as to why we've had grid collapses and will continue or may continue
if
to
remedial
have
action.
Grid collapses unless and until certain crucial things are done.
Okay.
All I'm about to say now are things I've said, I've written about, they are all well documented. So I'm not saying anything new.
Okay.
Of course, we appreciate the fact that we have a new regime in place that is eager and willing to start to address those major concerns in the power sector and energy sector generally. What is called electricity started in Nigeria in 1861 in Ijora here. So it's nothing new.
Those were the days of ECN.
Few years after it started in the United Kingdom, we had electricity here around Ojora. The structure that we had subsequently was grid-based distribution. Grid-based distribution targeted urban centers. Similar to the days of telephones, that we will have telephone box in your house and they run the telephone cables for you to have access. But the technology of telephony and electricity distribution have been changing over time. Let's take it back to the petroleum sector. Similar scenario. We had crude oil refined. We have pipelines laid to certain areas for us to distribute. You have burst pipelines. Why? Because those pipelines are weak and dilapidated. So any attempt for you to pump petrol into those pipes or pipelines, it will burst and you have wastages.
In fact, as you were saying that, Prof, I was reminded of, I think, way back when Fashola was governor in Lagos State, he had spoken in that same connection in relation to water supply.
The same thing.
Lead pipes, ancient,
archaic. So the infrastructure that we have, the transmission infrastructure that we had years back, they're very weak. Any attempt to, I'm trying to tone down my technical languages now, any attempt to pump power that's generated into it, you hear bwang.
Okay.
Because it's weak and cannot carry it.
Okay, that probably explains the explosion that was reported.
You always have that routinely because the grid infrastructure is dilapidated, is old and weak. So you now have new entities attempting to generate. We have like 15 to 20,000 hydro power that is generated. You can't evacuate. You can't put on the grid. Why? The capacity of the national grid is so weak and dilapidated. At any attempt to put new grid, it will burst. So, what are the options?
Sir, before you go forward, I was going to say, since men of knowledge, men of science, men, you know, who excel in administration have been in charge here, it's not as if we don't know what we're doing. That's why I'm surprised at what you're saying, that I can't even conceptualize the idea that it would not have been known that we have to fix this infrastructure as we are increasing capacity. The Obasanjo monies that were spent that people are complaining about till today, what was that all about then?
Thank you. Attempt had been made for the overhaul of national grid. Attempt had been made recently for what is called grid expansion. That hasn't worked.
Hasn't worked?
It hasn't worked. I will tell you why it's not going to work. It's like we're going against tides. For instance now, some countries now, they're not so much bothered about new roads. Do you know why? It's a policy thing. They're trying to take cars off the roads.
Okay.
To incentivize water transportation, rail transportation. And some countries are spending a lot of money for bike trails. So that people can bike the whole of Lagos.
Yes.
In safety. You know that when you go to the UK, when you go to Canada,
yes.
You can, you bike. You enjoy biking. It's safe and you don't need to spend money buying fuel. That's expensive now. Some countries have developed deliberate policy measures to take cars off the road. By tolling, if you go on certain roads, you pay heavily. If you get to certain urban centers, you pay through your nose for parking. So you are forced to leave your cars and go via public transportation or rail.
And there are policies directing all of this.
Strategic policies
designed
so that there is no pressure on the roads. And government will now deploy the resources that will have been used to construct new roads to maintain trails, rail transportation, water transportation, and basic things. This is cheaper.
So when you bring all of that to our system here,
so the same.
So what's our policies, sir? Is it our policies that have been lacking, that we've not been able to have an appropriate overview of the entire setup? And then, because we hear of so many consultants coming in.
See, I'm a practical person. Unfortunately, maybe the
That's not
law
unfortunate.
practice side of me tends to say things the way they are. I write, I theorize, I go all those bombastic languages of law, big grammar, fine. But when it comes to real national challenges, I look at you, I brought to heaven and tell you, Egbon, this is it, it will not work, you do it. That's what I do. Particularly in this power sector, let me tell you, for as long as we keep spending money on the dilapidated grid infrastructure, it's not going to work. The world is going off grid. Okay, let me give you certain examples. I was harsh against the federal government when they brought Manitoba Hydro.
Okay.
I did not only speak against that. Of course, there's another side of me that was sympathetic to anything from Canada anyway. What I wanted to do was to react so that they will hear me in Canada and Nigeria. So I wrote an article, and I opted to publish it in the University of Manitoba Law Journal deliberately to capture the Manitoba and Canadian audience and in Nigeria. So I wrote. I told them why Manitoba Hydro would not work. Manitoba Hydro had a contract for transmission. They had transition management contract with the Nigerian government, and I saw a lot of dirty things. And it wasn't transparent, and I asked relevant questions. And I said, Manitoba, you're going to mess yourself up in Nigeria, contrary to the Canadian culture, corporate culture, because of ABC. The Nigerian government, this is it. And I painted a picture. A few months after I published my article, Manitoba Hydro contract became messed up. And people started calling, even intelligence people called me thinking, oh, do you have access to certain privileged information? I say, you don't need a soothsayer to tell you this.
If you know what to look for, if you know what you're looking at.
So Manitoba Hydro had a contract to manage this same transmission. It failed. And of course, I know why it failed. I told them it was going to fail. It failed. They brought Siemens.
Siemens especially.
Buhari
was quite active in that sector.
I wrote against Siemens also, even in my new electricity law book, when I revised it recently. I said, Siemens will not be, it's not going to bring about the magic one in the power sector because of A, B, C, D, E, F. Today, we are struggling. The world, we're going against global tides. The world is going extensively off-grid. The concept of a federated grid wouldn't make sense to me in the 21st century.
Okay, that's a bit more. That's a bit of what I want to learn from you about.
Okay.
So what do you mean when you say the world is going off-grid? Because visually, we can just imagine a grid of wires servicing all over the place. But you say that whole national grid thing is like old hat now.
It's not realistic. You know why we had a national grid? And Nigerian government struggled with it. Political reasons. Because if you have disaggregated grid, meaning Lagos will have 24-hour access to power, and there's no power in for instance, in Bayelsa, or for instance in Gombe, in Yobe State. So whatever we've generated, we'll mop it up,
put it out,
and we'll have to do federal
character to it. So let everybody suffer the same.
What I call federal bad character. It was meant to be something positive. Because, for goodness sake, it's in Oshogbo here that we have the transmission infrastructure. Whatever power you generate from Lagos goes there. Whatever you generate from Kaduna goes there. You now start to distribute back. I will have transmission losses. So if you are generating 4,000 into the national asset, pulled together, by the time you start distributing, you have transmission losses unaccounted for. There's so many. And it was because of the so-called conceived political exigencies of allowing Nigerian and Nigerian state to develop at the same pace. It's not going to work. So it was a kind of a deliberate policy to have a centralized federated grid infrastructure so that they can give to other.
I can begin to get an inkling.
So the government was unwilling
to do the right thing
for several years and decades to let go of the national grid until recent constitutional amendment and the signing into law of the Electricity Act 2023 that frees off the national grid to the extent that we cannot have state-based grid. I even argue that we could have concession grid. We could have regional grid. Nobody wanted to hear the regional grid, because that might be an Odua agenda. That by the time you have Odua, your own Odua grid, then there will be crises or something. They have their own whatever. So we have to be careful. Even the so-called disaggregated grid was being seen as an agenda for certain things. No, we can't have a federated grid in the 21st century. It's not sustainable.
I see.
It's not sustainable. So we need to balkanize the grid. There's no point generating electricity in Lagos and taking it to the transmission line to be distributed to other areas. Because even what is generated in Lagos is not even sufficient for Lagos.
So the policy, since from the little that you've said now, one can begin to understand that the policy wasn't really aimed at a scientific efficiency.
It can never be.
It wasn't that way. So it's like the authorities knew that this is not necessarily the most efficient process, but however, it is what is most satisfactory in a political sense.
When in the 90s we started witnessing challenges, instead of now devising off-grid infrastructure, government had repeatedly been embarking upon grid maintenance and expansion. And largely, the reason why we seem to have spent, perhaps we have spent more in a supposedly privatized power sector in Nigeria is because federal government is holding on to the TCN,
Transmission
Company of Nigeria, the transmission aspect of the chain. Federal government is in charge of that one, and they've been spending a lot of money, and the money is going down the drain.
I was going to ask, to what effect?
Because we don't now need to go via the grid. There are a lot. We need to start deploying mini grid, which was what we ought to have done. We look at a settlement. It's okay. Population 2,000. Let's give them 1,000 megawatts. Oh, can you do it private sector? Let's work out the mathematics, the tariff mathematics and methodology. Okay, it's self-sustaining. In 20 years, they will recoup their money with interest. The community will be fine. Everything will be fine. Business will start to come because power will be stable with that. Look at community here. Oh, so that's why you have some settlements now, some estates, private estates now going for their home IPPs. And that's why now
independent power producers.
Yes, we now have embedded generation, meaning you can generate to target a particular location. So a lot of effort should be directed to off-grid generation and transmission and distribution, including captive. Captive is when established manufacturing concerns and industries like TVCs and the rest can generate power for their own use. And if this company now is generating 2 megawatts and their maximum use is 1 megawatt, what happens to the extra 1 megawatt? They look at the estate in the neighborhood and have a deal, power purchase agreement, and sell to them and make money, and they are fine. Those had been difficult until recently. As a matter of national policy of a federated grid. So when you generate, then you are forced now to sell it to the national grid to be distributed nationally. That would not be realistic.
Meanwhile, the problem of the dilapidated pipeline network
is
still there.
Even when we had independent power plants staggered all over the country, to wheel the power to the transmission power line became a major challenge. So countries are doing mini grids. Countries are doing off-grid. Countries are doing mobile grid. I'm sure you know of mobile power stations.
Yes, yes.
Just like mobile generators. You move it down, put it there, generate, connect the communities, and they're fine.
So this is the truth about, I mean, if it was a straightforward, academic, scientifically correct exercise, then this is what we'd be having. But you've explained how there are political considerations as well. And this, because when I hear knowledgeable people say that actually I've diagnosed this matter and it shouldn't be that much of a problem. Well, it might well be that they weren't taking all the different aspects of it into consideration in coming up with the idea that I've diagnosed. Are you diagnosing on this dilapidated national grid?
And it's even much more expensive. It's old technology. It's like saying, oh, you want to go back via the option of cabled telecommunication lines. Who does that? Your phone is not connected to any cable.
Because science has
Science is taking up. So why are we not seeing that in the power sector? We have it.
Coupled with, Prof, I hear that the reluctance of, they say that only about 40% of Nigerian electricity consumers are actually metered. They're complaining that we were not appropriately metered. People are reluctant to pay, it is said, simply because they see the inefficiencies. And NEPA resorted, well, not NEPA, but you know what I mean. They resorted at one time to an estimated billing, and that never was fair. So quite frankly, it looks like, in the light of what you said in the last 20 minutes or so, I don't know the extent to which we've begun to actually address this power crisis situation we have.
Is a long haul, really. Even the concern of the metering challenge that you pointed out. It was in this studio I talked about the politics of metering. It was in this studio, I think this studio, yes, studio. What brought about politics of metering? I said the discourse, not all, maybe all, maybe some, may, in quote, be unwilling to meter everybody. And the logic is simple. Once you're metered, you can control your level of consumption. You may decide to put yourself in darkness for 22 hours.
Yes.
And switch on your meter for 2 hours.
But that's fair, isn't it?
To TV.
That's fair, isn't it?
They need to make money. So they are conflicted in that regard.
Yeah.
So they stemmed down the metering process. Then there were policies somersault on metering. There was the regime called CAPME, which was a kind of credit scheme to enable you buy meters. When they were not making meters available, the federal government then brought out a policy that will enable Nigerians to now pay for their meters. Because meters are supposed to be assets of the discos. They will buy their meters, like credit-based. So each time you recharge your meters, you get credited for part of the money spent to procure the meters until the cost of purchase of meter is defrayed. That didn't work. They now brought out another policy called MAP, Meter Asset Provider, to extricate the discos totally from metering. They now concession metering to separate entities, companies who will now be in charge of metering. And guess what? It's a whole mess. A whole lot of mess going in there. Discos that were not supposed to have anything to do with those MAP indirectly now are involved. And they place their demand now so many times. When federal government rolled out its metering schemes, rolled out free meters. Another avenue for fraud. I'm not sure anybody is auditing the free meter scheme or the federal government that got billions of naira.
So where does all of this now bring us in the light of our trying to invite foreign direct investment? And one of the reasons I hear that they were a bit reticent before was the fact that we don't have all that is needed for anybody to invest effectively in your country.
Foreign direct investment in the power sector could be challenging. And before I go into that, you know, we have a crisis at hand. A medical doctor friend told me a nasty experience that should not even be said on here. In a rural hospital where they had no generator, even if they had, they can't afford to buy fuel to power the gen. They had no light, and they had to perform a surgery. Do you know what they did? rechargeable lantern and phones was what they used to light up the theater to perform surgical operations.
As bad as that.
As bad as that in these countries. Let me tell you, do you know a number of eateries, small-scale businesses that have folded up completely where we normally buy meat pies and donuts? Where are they? Because nobody can sustain that kind or those kind of businesses on diesel and petrol. So we have a major crisis at hand. How do we get out of this? We need massive investment in the power sector. How can we get that? Whoever is going to invest in your country will look at certain facts. Technically, we call it bankability study. Bankability studies means we look at the whole scenarios of so many factors are involved anyway. Look at whether investing in your company, in your country, or in your state makes commercial sense. Whether if I'm putting down my X plus Y amount of dollars, I can recoup that money plus yield over time. So if it makes business sense to invest in your community or in your state or in your country, investors will come. If investors are not likely going to recoup their investment with yield, they are not going to come. Sadly, in the last 10 years, we haven't had major investment in the power sector. We haven't had major foreign direct investment in the power sector. Why are they not coming? Because those who are on ground, existing players, are not really solvent. So there's no incentive for people to come on board.
And that's why when I think the last great thrust in this direction was the Siemens thing in the President Buhari era. One thought that, because it was said at that time that Siemens is going to come and it's going to clear up a lot of things, a lot of corruption, a lot of technical ability is going to be put onto the system. But you just said that you were watching all of that and you were doubtful that it was going to happen.
I was on here. Fortunately, I had another fellow on the other side in another studio, Rewani. Bismarck Rewani was quite optimistic about Siemens. And I was brutally pessimistic about it. And of course, we are all experts in our respective fields. At the end of the day, he had his say, I had mine. But then I'm vindicated.
Yeah, because
by now, if Siemens had been the magic one to bring about sustainability of the power sector, we should be seeing signs now.
So is it a matter of, when you say some people seem to have a pessimistic outlook, other people an optimistic outlook, is it, oftentimes you say we have to be patient. This thing will take time. A mass with an inertia needs time to get moving, and once it gets moving, then economies begin to accrue to it. Those kind of things we were told in the past, but you said, look, that doesn't bear scientific analysis.
Nigeria is now a country in a hurry for growth and development. We're in a hurry for development now.
Okay.
We don't have time anymore.